Dear colleagues, good morning once again to all of you. Apparently, I have to say good morning also to those who are following us on uh, in the streamed version of the conference. So greetings also to this very special audience. This first panel discussion, which is dedicated to expectations and reality of Euro introduction, realities that we are facing now. And but we will start by some technical notes. We have to complete by 11 this panel discussion. So the initial notes, for the initial notes, we will allocate no more than 7 minutes to each of the speakers, and then we will also offer the possibility to ask questions. And those of you who are watching us, perhaps you have my mobile phone number, and you can send me SMS messages, and so you can ask the questions also anonymously. So the first question, has Euro given to us additional economic and national security? Of course, Euro has brought convenience, and those of us who travel, and not only in the EU, but also outside the EU, we all understand how significant and convenient it is to have Euro currency instead of our sentimentally cherished lot. It's very easy to exchange, and it's internationally recognized and a major currency. Yesterday, this was mentioned a couple of times, namely that public support and public has increased from 38% in 2013 to reverse numbers, in fact, 83% now. So we see how important it is. And yet, the question is how to maintain it. What should we do to maintain this public support level, this sense of economic and political security which has been achieved? I would like to open this panel discussion by giving the floor to Sanita Bajāre, who is former alternate executive director of the World Bank and Secretary of State of the Ministry of Finance of Latvia. Also, during the period when Euro was introduced, you were quite instrumental in this process. Then medical doctor in a very important experience in administering medical services, also at the Ministry of Finance in regional and also global financial institutions. So the main question I would address to you, so the opinion of the Latvian public has improved, as I just mentioned. How to not destroy this trust? Well, first of all, thank you for your very kind introductory words. From all those positions that you mentioned, for me, the year 2015 seems to be very important when I joined the Ministry of Finance of Latvia as the first manager of Euro project, and I really took this Euro story as my own personal mission, and I really believed in it from the very first day. And in such panel discussions about Euro, in different compositions. Actually, we went through the whole period of joining Euro, and of course, we had our anxieties, we had a share of pessimism, and we had different arguments. And also today, we see the same. And for example, yesterday already the article published in Economist was mentioned on sustainability of Euro. And definitely we are going to have those opinions and arguments, because only when we have opposite opinions, we have the possibility to move forwards and also to develop. And we know that Euro is just a tool. It's not a miracle. It's money in dynamic circumstances. And for the government, the governments, the European Commission, the European Central Bank are doing everything to develop this currency, the money, and to ensure sustainability. And I believe this is the key word in this. And it's important for everyone: sustainability, security, and understanding, awareness that the fruit of my labor, which is expressed in monetary terms, will not be decreased or diminished that after some time I will be able to invest this money, I'll be able to provide education for my children and leave this money to my grandchildren. So this is trust in being successful in this life. These are fundamental values for all of us. And all officials who worked at the time in this Euro project, we felt very satisfied that we succeeded in it. I believe that one of the most smooth paths towards Euro was this, but this was of course not a matter to be dealt with overnight. Very many people contributed very important work to this. These are our sleepless nights and hours spent in our offices. Another point that I would like to make when speaking about Euro, I believe that Euro to a large extent performs this function of money compared to lots. And that was also mentioned before. We know that lots had this very symbolic value. To a certain extent, lots has always personified the state of Latvia in its name, and also because we regained our independence and reintroduced lots. So this symbolic meaning was always linked to money. But now, when we have Euro, I believe now money is more like money. And then, regarding sustainability and Euro, we cannot, this path is inconceivable without fiscal discipline. All those tools that are being developed both by the European Commission and by the European Central Bank, and we will probably talk about this in this panel. So this development is ongoing. We have achieved major progress in this, but there still remains lots to do. But just to sum it up, it's security, trust, and also it is a matter of sustainability. What to do to maintain this very high public assessment of Euro? Those anxieties that people had their grounds. People are afraid. People are afraid of novelties. But we go through those processes. We carry on all the technical switchover the way we can. And we also eliminate those anxieties concerning practical matters. And now all the survey results show that we have succeeded in this. Thank you. I have an additional question right away. At some point, we had two sort of categories of people, those who were for and those who were against the switch over to Euro. But there were also, there was a share of people who said, yes, we should introduce Euro, but not immediately. So the question is, if we had not introduced Euro 5 years ago, but no, let's say 5 or 6 days ago, what would be your response to those people, to the argument that we should wait? I believe that those benefits that Mr. Gavrilos just mentioned in his opening address, and also Vice President Dombrovskis mentioned in his speech, that all those benefits brought by Euro would have been delayed by 5 years. And now we can count the savings that we have when we make simple transactions, simple payments within the Eurozone. This is the price of money. If we want to develop as a business, if we want to take a loan, this is also fiscal expenditure for the state when the state is refinancing its debt. These are all savings, and I'm not even counting some things that were not put into previous calculations. For example, the convenience of having Euro, what kind of benefits it will bring to our tourism, because the number of tourists coming from Eurozone countries has increased by 1.2 million. This is a very impressive number. They come here, and it's convenient for them to come to the country, which is using the same currency, to feel comfortable, to understand the prices, not to be overcharged, which is quite typical of small currencies, which are not understood by anyone. So all this has played a very positive role, and I believe that it has had a very fundamental positive impact upon our economy.
On this note, I would like to go to the next of our panel speakers. Jānis Platais, the chairman of the board of the Fiscal Discipline Council of Latvia. So since January 1st, 2014, and with the introduction of Euro, we are celebrating not only the anniversary of Euro, but also your anniversary of being a chairman of the board of the Fiscal Discipline. You've been also the IMF consultant on taxes, international expert on taxes, and have worked for Ministry of Finance and Welfare for a number of years. Jānis, one of the main expectations, one of the promises after the joining of Euro area was that Euro will bring more disciplined fiscal policy and political stability and fiscal predictability. Has those expectations been met? Well, that's a very good question, in fact. Have those expectations come true? I would like to first underline that the speeches that were delivered yesterday and this morning were mostly around fiscal discipline, and therefore there is very little that I can add to those statements or those comments, and I can nevertheless try to add my bit, if you will. Common policy requires a very prudent fiscal and monetary policy and very strong coordination, and if we do not coordinate, then we run ourselves in the risk of missing out on important issues or important opportunities, and then we try to address those gaps, if you will, or those issues. They don't have a lot of time, and then we talk about expectations of what we had in reality. Indeed, when it comes to fiscal discipline, the main push was or came from our transition to Euro. And in Latvia, probably fiscal discipline was a more important issue compared to other countries. Other countries basically, copied or what the European Union did, whereas fiscal discipline was actually raised by the international lenders during the crisis, and they urged us to address the fiscal discipline very seriously. And the main aspect here is that the fiscal policy of the government has to be counter-cyclical. In other words, we have to analyze the economic cycles, be aware of where we are in the current economic cycle. So during the good times, we have to be very level-headed, if you will, in order to create the necessary buffers that can be used when the economy is not growing as quickly. We have enough money for all the issues that we need. Have we managed to do that? Yes, definitely. And as I spoke informally with some of the participants here at the conference, I heard that indeed we have managed to attain what we had to. We have a lot stronger fiscal management than we had before the introduction of Euro, prior to introduction of, or prior to switch over to Euro. Before crisis, we had to focus a lot on the fiscal discipline in order to qualify for the objectives of the EMU. But it is very difficult to stick to very prudent fiscal policy when you introduce Euro. I mean, you have to also work hard to maintain the fiscal discipline after the introduction of Euro, which is not an easy task by any means. We have to have a certain, fiscal balance in place. If you look at Maastricht criteria require you to have the budget deficit below 3%. But as we see, 3% is not enough. 3% of the GDP. If we would stick to 3% of the GDP up to now, we would most probably have would be in a worse fiscal shape than we are at the moment. So in other words, Latvia can be proud that we are among those European countries that have a stronger, better structured, a better shaped fiscal policy compared to some other EU countries. We have indeed a counter-cyclical fiscal policy, which is a sort of a heavy term, not really comprehensible by many, but to explain it in simpler terms, just look at the crisis that we went through in 2008, 2009, and the lessons that we've learned from this crisis. And the impact that the crisis had. So when the crisis hit us, we suddenly realized that our expenditure is proportionately too higher than it should be. Well, how can you mend that? Well, you can reduce the expenditure, but that's not enough. The previous crisis showed us that we were not able to cut the spending as quickly as was necessary, so we needed to think about the increasing revenue. So we had to raise taxes, which is a sort of an additional burden on the public funding, on the public expenditure. It's also an additional burden on the private sector, which has less access to public services, and they have to generate additional revenue in order to provide for everything that we need as a state. So some tough choices had to be made during the crisis, and counter-cyclical policy basically requires you to be prepared or use good times to create those buffers. You have to have a prudent policy, you have to have responsible policy, and you cannot increase the budget or government expenditure too rapidly. And that was a difficult choice. Nobody wants to say, at the moment we cannot afford to increase wages in a sector X and sector Y, although people deserve it and should earn more. But they have to also realize that if we increase wages rapidly now, then when the crisis hits us, we'll have to cut back those wages, or we'll have to lay off people. So, and currently this discussion is also taking place, and it's a very sluggish, very difficult discussion, because the expectations are very high when it comes to solutions, and it's a really heated debate. The adoption of the fiscal discipline law led to a number of benefits. We have a better estimation of the expenditure that the government can afford, and this estimation is done by the Ministry of Finance and the Fiscal Discipline Council, which I am a chairman of, and which meets on a regular basis, and also, looks at how we are meeting is concerned with how we are meeting the fiscal requirements. And there's an interesting example from my, colleagues or counterparts abroad. They often ask me, what is your Fiscal Discipline Council all about when I meet them? And I say that we are a watchdog, and we have to blow the whistle and raise the alarm when we are in a difficult or threatening situation, and we have to literally bark at the government. And many countries are still going through a debate whether Fiscal Discipline Council should be a watchdog or lapdog, but that's where I should stop probably. If I may, I'd like to sort of interrupt your flow, if I may. Fiscal discipline is of course important, and it's a very complex issue or phenomena, and one of the requirements for joining euro area was to have a prudent fiscal policy, not only monetary policy. So as a result of that, we are now in a situation where our monetary arms are tied, if you will, and we have fiscal space or fiscal opportunities. And what are you going to say to those who are saying that in order for us to boost our competitiveness, we have to use fiscal tools, irrespective of whether we're on an upward or downward cycle? So what we say to those people? Well, of course, those fiscal tools are important, and we need to put them to work, if you will. And fiscal space estimation is based on the assumption that when we are growing faster than our economy potentially we should curb the expenditure and should cut back on the public debt, or government debt in order to create a fiscal sort of safety net when we hit the bottom or when there's a recession, so we could have a reserve at the safety net to help us or catch us. And yesterday everyone was mentioning crisis, and everyone knows that there is a crisis ahead of us. No one's doubting that, because that is the sort of the nature of the market economy, the nature of the cycles in the market economy. But nobody can set up or put a finger on a precise date. But let's prepare, sledge, in summer, and carriage in winter, to be prepared for whatever seasons may bring. As next, I would like to introduce Jānis Ošlejs, CEO of Primekss. Did the introduction of euro help promote the image of Latvian businesses and Latvian economy abroad, and did that help you to win markets outside the European Union? You're the CEO and executive director of Primekss, winner of many innovation awards locally and internationally. You're a business entrepreneurship expert. You're a patent holder, and you're also creator of the and chairman of the Creative Industries Association. Could you, tell us in a couple of minutes, how much euro has eased your operation abroad? Well, from a broader perspective, and if you look at euro and euro area and joining of euro area, from a broader perspective, then you have to address several issues. I was very skeptical about introduction of euro, by the way. That's not a secret. And I would therefore like to share my opinion on some of the issues linked to euro. And the first sort of comment that I would like to make is that Malcolm Friedman, who was a very famous thinker who thought about money and monetary policy, he claimed that the monetary policy, or the objective of monetary policy, or the monetary policy is not aimed at promoting prosperity. It's aimed at bursting different bubbles and aimed at helping to overcome crisis much more easily. And monetary policy is not a tool which promotes growth. It may smooth out some of the imperfections, bridge the gaps, or help us overcome the crisis. That's what the monetary policy does, but it doesn't promote growth. But when there were discussions and when the euro introduction was discussed, there were a lot of comments made to which I disagreed, and I was prone to be right, actually, when I objected to those claims, because many people said that when we all join euro area, we will converge and our economy will grow, trade will increase, and some of the imperfections sort of will be smoothened out. But that didn't happen because there were other economic aspects at play. And let me share some of the graphs with you. For example, I have a graph here. This is the export volume of the Latvian goods and services. The blue one is export to non-European countries, non-euro countries, and the red one is an export to non-euro countries. And we're exporting more to non-euro countries, and the increase to exports to non-euro countries is a lot faster than to euro area countries. So just to provoke some thinking in you, how important euro is for the external trade, the role of the euro in the external trade, and how it can ease you or reduce your costs of trading with other euro area countries. I think this is a good example that the conversion rates and the conversion costs and the exchange rate fluctuation costs are not really a major factor, because it's a really sort of a minute part of the cost compared to the other cost elements which are important for the efficiency of the economy and productivity of the economy.
At the time, it was also said that we might introduce euro and we would have more investments flowing in. Mr. Dombrovskis also mentioned this, that the growth of investments has not been the one that we expected. If we take a general look at it, and, well, perhaps an extreme view, but I took a look at the total investments made in the countries from which the investments came following joining the Eurozone. And here you see the total amount of investments that has come additionally into Latvia. This is approximately 3.3 billion, approximately. Some countries have decreased investments, some have increased. All in all, 3.3 additionally. However, if we take a look at the group of countries, which is Russia, Luxembourg, and Cyprus, which is in fact Russia and Russia's offshores, this is in total almost 2 billion here. If we add Lithuania and Estonia, which are our natural neighbors, which are always investors, this is almost 3.3. Here we see Spain and Germany, those positive amounts. So in fact, we might say that since joining the Eurozone, from some kind of flows coming naturally to Latvia just because we are in Eurozone, these expectations have not been met. People invest in Latvia. Those who invest are people outside, coming from countries not belonging to the Eurozone and neighbors. And the investments never happened. And if we look at the total bank credit portfolio, we see again that the total portfolio has decreased in the banks. This is 2014, this one 2018, approximately by 1 billion euros. And these have been replaced by non-banking institution loans with very high interest rates. And so we are paying huge interests for this. So what I wanted to say, we should not take a simplified view on euro. Euro does not mean that somehow automatically by some kind of magic money will just come to us or resources flow in. And just because we have this magic paper with labeled euro, we are going just to grow. Euro provides very clear possibilities and very clear restrictions, and you have to understand them very clearly if we want to develop successfully within the Eurozone. And I am underscoring this successfully because not all countries belonging to the Eurozone are successful. And again, some figures for some countries, this is Greece, 15 years since joining the Eurozone, minus 15%. It is by 15% poorer compared to the time when it joined. And Italy also has become slightly poorer compared to the situation before joining the Eurozone. Portugal, Spain, well, Finland, Spain, France, these are the countries which have not been able to develop much during those 15 years. However, there are some countries who have developed quite successfully. For example, Latvia. Latvia has developed as successfully as such countries which have not joined the Eurozone and are in Eastern Europe. The average growth rate for Eastern European countries is approximately the same for those belonging to the Eurozone and for those outside it. So this is quite well. We are somewhere. However, what I really wanted to say is the following. Euro is not some kind of automatic panacea which brings us some money magically flowing into our wallets. Euro brings also some risks with it. And some countries, not at all bad countries, for example, Italy, which is unable to get out of this very poor growth situation. So for us, we are practical people, and so the question should be practical. What should we do in this situation? First of all, I definitely support attempts made by Europe to deepen integration. Europe will never be successful and will not be able to develop unless some kind of way is found how to achieve growth in Italy, in Greece, in other southern countries. I also support this common centralized budget of the European Union, also spent for those countries which are less successful. I believe this is the only path that we can take. We should also think about common bonds, common budgets. Latvia's position, by the way, currently is the opposite. We are supporting financial discipline, and we are also stating that those countries who are undergoing financial crisis themselves have to take responsibility for it. Okay, this is one way of doing this. However, this might cause problems for us if we end up in a situation of crisis. Currently, we are growing quite easily, and because we are catching up, other countries. However, if we reach the ceiling of the technological growth, which depends upon our education level and level of technology, so what then? So my question to Latvia is, what should our policy be that would allow us to be successful within the Eurozone? I believe that we should really balance, think about the balance of export and import of goods and services. Those countries are successful that have the surplus all the time. And this indicator is the one that really shows very accurately our competitiveness. Currently, we are breaking even. Probably in 2018, we'll have, I believe, minus 150 million. And the solution to this would be major investments and also reconsidering how to invest in producing goods and services that we can sell in Europe. So we have to make investments in production and in development, and we have to generate those investments here locally. We have to do this ourselves. So to conclude, we are within the Eurozone. We are doing quite fine. But it is not bringing just magical opportunities of growth. It provides real risks, actual risks. And to avoid these, we have to increase investments in this sector of production and of services that we can trade in. Thank you, Jānis, for your comment. I really liked the part where you said that we shouldn't take a simplified view on euro. At that point, I wanted also to pick up on some elements in the figures that you were showing, because 2014, for us, two things coincided. We, first of all, introduced euro, and secondly, de facto, we became the external border of the European Union or even the Western civilization, because the geopolitical situation changed. In that situation, also many investors, foreign investors, were quite anxious. And this situation, to a large extent, determined their willingness to invest or not to invest in Latvia and in the Baltic countries. However, I have another question. Our position, our being, Latvia's being in the Eurozone, and putting that in the context of Brexit, does it make our situation vis-à-vis the United Kingdom more complex or simplifies it? Well, I believe our situation is not linked to Brexit. And Brexit is just a signal showing that if the European policies are not successful, and in the case of Brexit, this was migration policy, which was openly unsuccessful and caused indignation among British people, but also Euro policy. We had this number of unsuccessful Eurozone countries, especially in the south. And if they had been successful, they perhaps could have absorbed the immigrants coming, which later on traveled to the United Kingdom. This also somehow facilitated Brexit. So this incomplete growth and wrong dynamic perhaps also contributed to the Brexit story. So the fact that we are in the Eurozone, that's fine, that's excellent, but we really should think how to not be unsuccessful. Thank you for your comment. And finally, Ilze Juhansone, The Deputy Secretary General of the European Commission previously was at the Migration and Citizenship Affairs Office at the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also representative in the European Union, permanent representative until 2015 when she moved on to FGD, working with at the European Commission, working with relationships of the Commission with other institutions of the EU. But now let's move on. And if we take a look into the future, what happens with the completion of monetary and economic union that was promised long ago? Or should we just think that the crisis are the only factors which are promoting deeper integration within the EU? Should we be looking forward to the next crisis to complete this integration process? Well, thank you, and I'm really very happy to be again in Riga and to participate in this discussion. I would like to start by saying what Jānis underscored, that we shouldn't take a simplified view on euro, because you can never take just one thing out of the context. And euro is only a currency, but also it's an economical and political project and has many interconnections. Another point which is very important, we all need greater self-confidence, both here in Latvia and also in Europe. And that's why I'm not sharing your opinion that the economic and monetary union is not developing. If we look at the 5 President report in 2015, it very clearly outlines 3 stages and also completion of economic and monetary union. It's planned to complete it by 2025. And it's not that we are not doing anything. During the first stage, we were really focusing on what we could do with very simple measures. And the first part, economic union, of course, needs more serious coordination of reforms. Jānis also mentions this. Being in the Eurozone, the reforms and also interaction between reforms in different countries, this is very important. European semester, which has been reinforced really seriously, and the Commission has really paid great attention also to the dialogue with the member states and also demanding responsibility from the member states for the offered recommendations, also Eurozone recommendation within the European semester to really look at what's happening, at what kind of adjustments in policies should be made. Another very important element, which we sometimes underestimate, this is the agreement on the social pillar. Very serious progress on the European level has been achieved. All member states were able to agree that we will pay more attention to coordination of social policies. And again, sometimes we take this as obvious, as self-evident. Social matters have always been very sensitive for member states, and yet this ability to agree that greater coordination was necessary, that's a very serious step forwards. And that was at the point when the economy was developing, we were out of the crisis. So I do not agree to this statement that we can do anything only in times of crisis. Also, many things have been done in banking union, also capital markets union development. Lots of legislation has been drafted. Of course, we have to do a lot. We have not reached agreement on deposit guarantee scheme in Europe. And yet we have those philosophical differences, different schools clash, different opinions, what should be given priority, the sharing of risks or decreasing risks. But this discussion takes time. And if we take a look just one step in the future, if we look at this coming financial framework, the European Commission also promised some financial tools within the MFF framework. And we had lots of discussions. Again, should another completely separate measure should be introduced. In the summit of December, member states agreed that this would be part of MFF. And indeed, these discussions are ongoing. What kind of tools are needed? And this will take lots and lots of time. And yet, at the same time, we see that one step at a time, and sometimes indeed we have very, very tough discussions. And sometimes it takes lots of time. And of course, the Commission, we would like everything to proceed faster because it's all clear to us. And yet, when preparing from the Eurozone summit, thinking about the arguments to present, why this budget should be included in MFF, we understood that the member states are searching for answers to the same questions that were raised in our internal discussions. So one needs these debates, this discussion. We have to reach those common conclusions, and only then we can move on. So I would say that the progress that has been made is really considerable, but as the old saying goes, Riga is never completed, Riga is never built and finished, and that can be applied also to monetary and economic union. We should never take things as obvious or self-evident. We have to keep working on them. And of course, the crisis will come. The question is how well prepared we are for the crisis. Do we have all the necessary infrastructure in place, all the tools that we need to deal with the crisis and to have as small consequences as possible? And the final idea that I would like to mention.
About export and export markets, that is one of the benefits which is derived indirectly from Euro, but comes directly from us being a part of the single market of the European Union. The external demand for free trade unions with free trade agreements, with the European Union is, unprecedented, the biggest that it has ever been. We just completed negotiations with Japan, which is now responsible for a third of the global GDP. We have CETA with Canada, and the speed of negotiations with New Zealand and Australia. Last year, Commission mandated the negotiators, and right now we have reached a point where the New Zealand and Australia is ready to finalize those negotiations in spring. In past, it took 7, 8, 9 years to negotiate the trade agreements with the European Union, with the European Commission. Now it is literally taking, years or months, because everyone is seeing the EU as a reliable partner with whom it is worth negotiating those trade agreements. Thank you. Well, I just, started thinking, well, probably I should ask the question nevertheless, slightly philosophical question, but, and again, if you look back at the evolution of the EU and the European project and the great bargaining, the great bargains that were the main sort of the drivers of the Euro integration, those crises, they have been important, they have been a catalyst, for introducing, specific arrangements. And that's why I have a question about social pillar that you mentioned in your intervention, and that we are not focusing enough on social pillar. So the question to you, a philosophical one, in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll go through a major change which will be brought about by digitalization, automation, robotics, which will lead to increased unemployment as well as a side effect. Will this, unemployment crisis, if we may call it so, will it not force the EU member states to invest more in the social pillar? And probably the integration will come when low-skilled labor will be massively laid off, will be massively unemployed and substituted by robots. That's a futuristic sort of vision and a philosophical question, but I hope you get it. Well, nobody sort of raised alarm bells about this. Nobody panicked about this. But, 2 years ago, in fact, I attended a similar discussion, and artificial intelligence was discussed there by, young people, and they were panicking, artificial intelligence is coming, it's here, it will, squeeze us out. It's the same as the steam train. When people saw the steam train back in the day, they were afraid, literally, of this beast. So now people are much more rational, much more cool-headed, and see the benefits or the opportunities that the AI brings about. But will it, cancel out jobs? Will it reduce job opportunities? Well, that's a very good question. I think that, informally we discussed it here, and I think, or we agreed that it is basically reshaping the labor market and forms of employment, and it will probably require us to get more engaged in continuous training and continuous learning, and we'll have to acquire new skills throughout our lifetime. Will robots and machines substitute us? I don't think so. We are keen to buy things online now, things being delivered to us, to our doorstep now. I used to go to shops, now I don't have to anymore. And those are people that are delivering those goods to you that you purchase online, if those are not substituted by drones. But then you will need a drone operator again, somebody to run things. So I wouldn't say that some of the jobs will disappear as a result of automation and robotics. Those jobs will be reshaped. They will change or morph into something else, which will put an additional pressure on education and the way we access new skills and learn new competences. And we know that this education shift is something that we have not successfully addressed so far. Well, thank you. This gradually brings us. This is a nice way to transition to the questions from the floor, from the audience. Nobody knows my phone number, so no questions have been texted to my mobile phone. But if you have any questions, note them down, jot them down, and probably raise your hand whenever I invite you. But one last question to all the four panelists, to continue our discussion. On the reality that we are living in and the possible future, considering that we are part of the EU, I have a fundamental question here. Euro area and the completion of the Economic and Monetary Union, that's one of the objectives that we've been striving for. But then, on the other hand, the introduction of euro was also a part of completing the single market, or the project for completing a single market and better coordination among single market participants, member states rather. Don't you think that we should shift our focus, and as Jānis already mentioned in his speech, should we, switch our focus or shift our focus towards, completing a single market, making, a fully operational single market, and this euro is, just a currency, really. Well, it is a currency, of course, and you use it as a means of payment, of course, as any, currency. But single market is, of course, equally important. And in order to benefit fully from what the single market offers us, we need to explore, those possibilities and work constantly for the completion of it. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a miracle. I mean, euro is not a miracle, and it's a project or a work in progress that we started 10 years ago, and that we will have to continue focusing on as long as we are a part of the euro area. But I would like to underline one thing, however, when it comes to any issue, be it single market or be those structural reforms of any sort, we have to understand the causes and the consequences of any effort or any arrangement, and we should focus or be goal-oriented much more, result-oriented much more, bearing again in the back of the mind, different causes or different elements that affect it. Let me jump to another area. Euro basically ties our sort of monetary policy arms, if you will, and that's a claim that I do not subscribe to. I don't agree. Devaluation of national currency as a sort of a safety valve that the governments can open or rely on when they find themselves in crisis. Yes, maybe, probably that's a good valve, a useful sort of valve, but will it solve all the problems? No, definitely not. Will this, tool lead to other problems? Will this lead to other problems? Yes, definitely. When you are trying to mitigate a crisis, you have to use other tools as well, a set of tools. I think Latvia showed it when it, focused on its competitiveness, when it focused on its growth. It showed how good and efficient it is at using other tools compared to other Euro area and EU member states. And we were able to prove everyone that, by solving the problems, by, mitigating the problems, by implementing, structural reforms in other sectors, you'll be able to arrive where you want to be, no matter where you want to be. Well, you asked a very pertinent question, in fact. It is a work in progress, like Riga. It will never be completed, or it has to be completed, and then we have to have an all-round support for the completion. And if I may, compare it again to a market, I think that in 1920s, 1930s, when the Riga supermarket was built, everyone thought that it's completed, it's done, it's finished. And now Riga City Council is thinking about reconstructing the Riga supermarket, although it was finished in 1920s or 30s. So as time goes by, you have a different perspective on the issue from a time perspective, and we are constantly evolving and moving forward, and we are trying to finalize one phase or complete one phase, and then we are entering into a new phase where we have different objectives, where we're thinking about how to further improve, upon the results or build upon the results of the previous phase in order to make it much more convenient, more efficient, and suitable for us. So it is again a work in progress, constantly, and it will never be, I think, finished. There will be tweaks here and there all the time, and when it comes to Euro, it's all about economic and monetary union, and there's no limit, or sky's the limit when it comes to improving or building further EMU. As soon as you're done with one problem, you find another problem. Yes, it all depends on the context. Everything is changing, evolving, and developing very quickly, and we are not, captured in this moment or encapsulated in this moment. Everything is moving and developing, and we shouldn't get caught up by the moment. Instead of monetary policy, we should be addressing single market, is a claim that I don't agree to. When it comes to single market, it's functioning just fine. When it comes to EU, I as exporting company have no problem, trading inside the EU with other EU member states. There are minor improvements to be made. I can't really mention any of them on the spot. I think the single market is functioning just fine. And, I can't agree with Sanita, who's claiming that monetary policy is tying our hands, and not agree that monetary policy is not everything. I think fiscal policy and, fiscal space is what allows us to spend the budget as efficiently as possible, and monetary policy allows us to focus on sort of the monetary side of the economy. And I don't agree that monetary policy has become redundant. Now we have made it redundant after the joining of Euro area, and this is bad. In fact, our economy is growing as quickly as in the countries that don't have their own national currency anymore, but we don't have any influence of the monetary policy anymore. I think that the monetary and the fiscal policy should be tied closer together in order to compensate for the missing, instruments of the monetary policy in some of the countries. And therefore, I think that the monetary sort of the side of the issue should be addressed much more seriously. Common bonds or single bonds, European bonds should be addressed very seriously, and the budget of the EU should be addressed much more seriously. We should be much more proactive. Of course, EU finds it very difficult to do so because Germany is sort of trying to put brakes on everything or is against it, and that's why we are stuck. So this raises a question of what we as Latvians or Latvia can do, what we as a country, a member state can do when it comes to Fiscal Discipline Council. I think that we should go even further when it comes to responsibilities of this council, and it should not only focus on the budget deficit, which is not the main indicator, the Maastricht criteria. That's a sort of a longer story, but that's not the most important indicator. I think we should have a broader perspective, with competitiveness of our economy in mind. In the fiscal Discipline Council should think, how, fiscal policy can achieve stability and greater competitiveness of our economy. And I think that we should start building a budget surplus, a fiscal buffer, in order to fight back the internal consumption surge and promote the exports or the external trade. And that would be a sort of a good response to the situation in which we are finding ourselves, where we need to stabilize our economies in the euro area.
I believe that perhaps we should stop focusing on completing one project or another. Actually, we can move forwards only through development, and you have to keep moving. You cannot just set some kind of date. I'm going to complete monetary union on that date, and everything will be done, and we will live happily ever after. We have to keep thinking about new tools, about new challenges, and the same applies to the common market. I agree to a large extent to what Jānis said. It is well functioning. At the same time, we know that in the service sector, the common market is not really functioning, and we know why. There are all kinds of obstacles to that and resistance from a number of member states to proceed. Unfortunately, on many occasions, when we talk about harmonizing some rules, also within the framework of the common market, by the end of the day, we reach only the lowest level of harmonization, which makes life difficult for businesses. Many things could be done in this respect. About economic competitiveness, I believe one significant thing is business environment. And again, each member state can do really a lot. And also the image that countries have and the way we present it externally. I believe that a year and a half, Latvia had lots and lots of problems because we were creating the impression that everything was bad here. So the question of communication is also very important. And I will come back to my initial thesis that sometimes a bit of self-confidence goes a long way. So we just now get rid of expectations to complete. So now we expect continuation. Any questions coming from the floor? I see some people. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Lolita Čigāne. I'm the former head of the European Affairs Committee at the Latvian Parliament. 2018 was the year of our centenary, of the 1 year of our wonderful song celebration. We had a lot to tell to others and to be proud of. But we also had tragic scandals in our banking sector connected to money laundering. So I would like now to ask all the speakers to provide their opinion on whether the fact that the scale of money laundering in Latvian banks that was reached was linked to any way to our joining the Eurozone. And my question to Ilze, are any measures taken currently with respect to money laundering in the banks of the Eurozone countries? Are they convincing enough, ambitious enough, these measures? So then let's begin with Ilze. I will start by answering the second question of Lolita, which is addressed to me. Again, we see this very paradoxical position of Latvia in connection to European issues. Usually we are in this position that Europe should not be interfering in things that, in matters that apply only to Latvia. But whenever any challenge comes, then we immediately turn to Brussels and say, why were you not doing anything? And this applies also to the situation with money laundering and the functions that, in our opinion, Europe had to assume sooner when the first discussion started of these issues. But at that time, the position, if I remember, was quite reticent. Currently, we have proposals, and the member states are taking these very seriously. And I believe that agreement on this regulation on the European level is still possible in this convocation of the Parliament and the Council, because the member states are now really paying attention to these matters. About money laundering and non-resident banking business, we all know that that was also one of the questions that was discussed before we joined the Eurozone, and also the public support. These were the last two remaining questions. Well, perhaps I will now perhaps be quite perhaps nasty. In Denmark, actually, I once just met a colleague from Denmark, and they said, Estonia, that's a terrible country. And I believe that in Denmark now, they have this impression of Estonia as awfully corrupted country. So this is, which is not usually the situation with Estonia. But I don't think that money laundering in banks is just happening in one single bank. There's usually a series, and usually the whole money laundering goes through 5 and 10. And my question is, where are other banks, apart from ABLV, where these are, and why this one was chosen? Well, but another point. Initially I was quite anxious seeing that non-resident banking business is on decline in Latvia, but now I'm not anxious anymore, because I believe that this business is quite risky, and this deposit guarantee functions, and only because of this business is possible. And now, if we decrease money laundering and also the scale of non-resident banking, that could be safer for Latvian economy. Export is growing. We have also are now finding new jobs for people. And even if the scale of financial services is decreasing, perhaps it's a good thing. Perhaps it was a good thing that ABLV Bank was closed. Jānis, your opinion? Well, that was a very good question. Actually, I remember in the year 1994, when the Monetary Fund, in one of the missions, all of a sudden found out that portfolio investments were growing very fast here in Latvia. And at that point, when working at the Ministry of Finance, we thought investments, that's fine. Money is coming in. We have more money. We can do more at the moment. We were not aware of the fact that this could entail some danger. And I believe the year 2018 was not the year when these problems originated. It was just the moment when these problems surfaced so high that you could no longer ignore them. So apparently, well, we have been quite lucky. At the time when we had those times of very poor economy, in deep crisis, at that time, this money somehow helped us to support economy sectors with high added value, but with very high reputational risk. So perhaps it's a good thing that in 2018, when our economy was strong, and we had the possibility to overcome these problems and to decrease these risks, and to move into the circle of countries that are working in a more honest way, that our banks are not relying on the business, which is in fact active money laundering. And to conclude these answers, I wouldn't want to reiterate what was already said, but I really agree to what Jānis just said. I'm thinking about understanding and awareness. Now we also have greater awareness of money laundering, also of financing terrorism, and all those very important issues. I believe that all banks now much better and deeper understanding of these matters. And yet, coming back to the story of the euro, because we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the euro, I would just like to remind you remind you of this very fundamental difference. If we can imagine, for example, such events, such shocks in the financial markets at the time when we still had lot, perhaps we would again be in a situation with people queuing outside the Bank of Latvia wanting to exchange lots into euros. We have experienced such situations, and not just once. While going through this very difficult time of overcoming the crisis from 2008 until 2011. And just to underscore once again that we have euro, and when we have such very serious shocks in our financial markets, in fact, this did not cause any kind of anxiety neither among society nor companies. We have 6 minutes left. Anyone else from the floor wanting to put a question? Andris. Andris Gobiņš, European Movement in Latvia. Kārlis, you threatened that this would be the panel discussion looking at what has happened over this period of 5 years. But I would like to hear from the experts what would be Latvia's interests when looking into the future. 3 of you said that continuous or eternal development was needed. Someone else said that problems still existed, but, well, to put it like this, we still have some deficiencies that need to be dealt with. And let's not speak about Europe in general, but about Latvia, knowing the situation, the people that we have, what Latvia should do that would perhaps comply with Latvia's interests. So what we could do, I believe that sometimes we really lack this in Latvia. We are in this responsive or reactive mode and not in proactive. And perhaps this wonderful panel and this wonderful discussion would perhaps inspire the government to, the new government to put in the government declaration some points what we could do. Well, I'll still use this opportunity, and I will put in one of my questions, in addition to what Andris said. So Latvia's interests, but to add to it, I have another question related to expectations. So this time we'll start with Sanita and conclude with Ilze. Participation in the Eurozone, this means not only possibilities, opportunities, but also responsibilities. Mr. Platais already pointed out to some things and also said that we should get into this group of countries that are working with integrity, working honestly. Adding to Andris' questions about Latvia's interests, the following: what are our responsibilities as a Eurozone country for the coming 5-10 years? I believe that these duties, these responsibilities really fit well with our interests. We have those years of good growth, as Mr. Platais said, so we have to prepare buffers, reserves for other times, thinking about other times to come. That's one point. So that's about our responsibilities and duties. Also, when we think about Maastricht criteria, one of those criteria pertains to budget deficit. The other one would be, to my mind, solidarity, or this European awareness in us as individuals, and also the wish to take a broader view. And again, it's in our interests to be far-sighted. Of course, we are talking about our beloved country, but actually we are in this more extensive European context, and our interests go beyond our territorial borders. So that's the whole European Union, and these are our interests. So perhaps we should really move towards common goals, which really are harmonized with the obligations and responsibilities. Because you can never have only rights without obligations. You always have both. And likewise, it's not possible to have only benefits. You have to give something. And so, and this would, and it's not only the new government, but also Latvia should think about what it could do in the coming 5 or 100 years. Sanita, thank you for saying already many things that I intended to say. Well, we both come from the Ministry of Finance. Well, but to develop perhaps the previous discussion, I believe that we should understand that we are playing a very particular game or sports, and we are not going to solve the situation by replacing the rules in football and allow anyone to play by his own rules or give the ball, each a ball. That's not the case. We are actually developing some common rules and also sticking to those rules. And we are doing this in a way by understanding what we are doing and believing it to be proper and good. And so this is the way we should also continue developing our fiscal policy. Among the new measures, among the new mechanisms now being developed by Europe, I would like to highlight this new investment measure that perhaps would be tied more to the implementation of fiscal policy in conditions of economic cycle. So if a member states were in a situation where they had economic recessions, then they would need to make greater investments. That's elementary logic. So we invest into the future at the moment when we are in a poor shape. If we do it otherwise, if we want to develop at the time when we have economy developing, then the costs are higher. Resources have already been used. All people want to build, the private sector, the households, the state, and so we overburden the market. And so our policy is not sufficiently counter-cyclical. So all this will continue. The second factor, the depth of economic analysis. In Latvia, we adopt many decisions just on the basis of my own personal observations of my neighbor. But it's not always really based on deep capital fundamental analysis, which states this is good policy. We should do this because there is scientific evidence, there are economic calculations made that this should happen like this. And this is one of the directions that we should move forwards to develop better policy, to better explain what's going on, and to have better results.
Jānis?
Thank you, Jānis. What about you? Well, the current government of Latvia, in a European context, is a sort of a fiscal hawk or fiscal eagle compared to other Hanseatic so-called European Union countries. We're against the MFF and the additional MFF allocation for the southern member states. Well, that will have its impact. Most probably some of the southern European countries not being able to be full-fledged members of the euro area will drop out of it, and then only the Nordic countries and the eastern countries will be the strong core of the euro area or eurozone, and then we'll see whether those surpluses from Germany will then be transferred here to Latvia. But that's what our position is all about, and we are actually playing on turbulences, and we are, hoping to have a more consolidated euro area in future without, weaker member states. And I already mentioned, trade of goods and services is something that we should support, invest in to a larger extent in order to, create a buffer that would help us if this hardline policy, will have negative consequences. Would like to urge everyone to focus on real economy, supporting, promoting real economy, on exportable goods and services, and having a trade surplus, which means that we should probably slow down the financial influx. I think that the central bank has a role to play. It has to also limit or restrict the external lending coming in, and they have to therefore, restrict external lending to also bring down the internal domestic consumption and make sure that we have a trade surplus and are still competitive. Thank you. So what does the European Commission expect of Latvia? Well, three things, essentially. First of all, we are a small and open economy here, and we should be more active, more confident, and more proactive in influencing the European Union thinking, or feeding more into the European Union thinking and decisions, because we have the intellectual potential and the capacity to do so. So we just have to be braver, bolder, more vocal, more animated, if you will. I think that the fiscal policy and constant improvements in the business environment in order to arrive at the preconditions mentioned by Jānis, for us to be able to develop better is something that we should also focus. And then there's another major challenge that we need to address, how to balance the investment, public investment, and EU investment or EU funding, because our growth is mostly based on increased EU support, and we have the MFF cycles, but then we suddenly run out of money, and there is a sort of a financing gap. How to coordinate better all different sources of funding in order to avoid major hikes and major drops, that's the main challenge. These are the main challenges for the coming years. Thank you. So I have to thank all four panelists. We have to be bolder, we have to export more, we have to be more analytical, insightful, more confident, and to have greater esteem. So I'd like to thank all of the four panel members for active participation. Thank you all for active listening. There's a coffee outside, we conclude this panel, but we don't conclude the discussion on the expectations. I'll pass the baton to Ina, who will talk about symmetric, asymmetric shocks and the way to address them. But that's, up to the next panel to discuss. Thank you all. Let's give a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.